Support for WUWM podcast comes from Hop Harvest and Vine and Good Harvest Market in Pewaukee, part of One Destination, combining farm-to-table dining, local craft beers, and organic groceries under one roof. More at goodharvestmarket.com.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Joy Powers. Advocates say the Trump administration is taking steps to dismantle a low-cost childcare program. Today we'll talk about what it could mean for Wisconsin families. Then on Capital Notes, we'll look at how our next governor will handle the influence of education on Wisconsin politics.
What of those resources will you put into education for K-12 when you've got Medicaid, you've got University of Wisconsin system, you've got all these other kind of demands on the state budget to deal with in your next 2-year period?
Plus, we'll meet an artist from Wisconsin who uses cardboard to sculpt stories from his family history.
Once you glue it on, it's very hard to adjust it or change it or move it. So you have to, each piece that you put on, you have to think 3 steps ahead.
All of that is coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Joy Powers, and thank you so much for joining us. Head Start provides free and low-cost early child care for more than 12,000 kids across Wisconsin. That includes many immigrant families and families dealing with the impacts of poverty. But new changes to the program proposed by the Trump administration may remove class size limits and require all instruction to be in English. To learn more about the proposals, WUWM education reporter Catherine Kokel speaks with Jenny Maurer, the executive director of Wisconsin's Head Start Association.
What came out was the technical term is called a notice of proposed rulemaking. So this is the process by which the administration proposes new rules for different federal programs. Right now, nothing is changing for Head Start. So for families that are enrolling and getting ready to bring their kids to the Head Start classroom, they should feel really confident that they're getting the same great service and standards, whether they're in the city of Milwaukee or whether they're in Manitowoc. So right now, those standards are still in place, but this proposal is really a sweeping piece of deregulation that fundamentally alters the rules that govern how Head Start is meant to function. I heard an analogy that I think might be great for your listeners. So Congress authorizes Head Start through the Head Start Act. So that's like buying a piece of furniture at a big box furniture store. And the standards are like the instruction manual that comes with it. They're all the things that tell you how to put that piece of furniture together. And so that's what rolling back the standards, why it's so alarming, because it's the detail that really provides programs across the country so that you have that consistency regardless of where your child is attending Head Start and regardless of which community.
I think the analogy is useful too because people may not exactly understand how this program is chartered and basically why it matters that the federal government is proposing changes. Can you run through some of those other proposed changes?
Yeah, so there are a number of pieces in this proposed rule change that are really alarming. And I can start with the increases in teacher to child ratios, because this document is really full of references to flexibility and that communities can make decisions for what's right for their community. But I think it's really important for folks to know that when you're talking about kids, there's safety standards in place for really good reasons. I think, are there places within the Head Start standards where it's possible to consider changes? Certainly, to have fewer regulations, but there isn't a single person who I've encountered in the Head Start field that says, the thing that we really want is more kids in the classroom. No one has been asking for this. No one I've talked to thinks this is a good idea. And in fact, what we know about Head Start kiddos is that they're often coming from family situations where there's a lot going on in their family and in their community. There's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of different repeating things that a kiddo is dealing with. And so those children are often coming with speech and language delays, autism-like behaviors, as well as other developmental and physical concerns. And again, the answer to those challenges is more support, fewer children to adult ratio so that those children can get the support they need to thrive and grow. Because at Head Start, we know there's no bad kids. There's just kids who need a little extra love and support. So increasing the ratios is really an off-base solution that isn't recommended by any experts or any kids and families. I think we all can pretty clearly see that the answer isn't more children in the classrooms.
Thank you. That's helpful. Critics from across the country and Head Start associations in other states have said that this is kind of a backdoor way of dismantling Head Start. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. I think I would agree that this move by the administration is really an attempt to dismantle what we know has worked and promotes quality and promotes those long-term outcomes for kids and families and really for our communities. Again, there's a lot of rhetoric in this proposal about flexibility and about adding more children, giving more children access to Head Start. But I would really encourage everyone to look to what is in the standard and to what is in the budget. There's not a there's not any proposal to increase the funding for Head Start at this time. You can say flexibility up and down until the cows come home, but the reality is that flexibility comes on the backs of staff and children. Programs will have to serve more kids. So I would really encourage us to think about that word flexibility as a Trojan horse. It's really what they really should have said is we're requiring you to serve more kids. And I really feel like this proposal is misleading in its aims.
Now, there have been pieces of this proposed rulemaking that have been dropped. And so there was originally a new documentation standard that would have required programs to verify immigration status. That is no longer part of this proposed rule. But there are other pieces of this, like requiring instruction in English, that people are concerned about disproportionately impacting immigrant families or families with mixed immigration statuses. This is a population that heavily relies on free and low-cost childcare provided by Head Start. I'm wondering how people are thinking about the impacts specifically to immigrant families and families with mixed immigration statuses as these proposed rules are coming forward.
Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned that is in this proposal is a requirement for all instruction to be in English. And, as I've talked about this proposal, I really want folks to think about what it's like to get a classroom of 3-year-olds ready to go outside in the winter. So one requirement this proposal has is a time requirement for physical education. Now, I'll put these two proposals together. First of all, if anyone's been to a Head Start classroom, they know there is tremendous amount of movement and physical activity happening. If you've met any child from the ages of 3 to 5 or as soon as they can walk through 5, there's constant movement. And programs are always trying and working to get kids outside, or if the weather is too bad, as it often is in Wisconsin, there's large gross motor rooms, so places where kids can play when it's snowy outside or it's too cold. Now, so thinking about that English only piece, I would just encourage folks to think about the practical realities that if you have a group of children, so in Western Wisconsin, in parts of Milwaukee, we have classrooms where kids are speaking different languages. If you have a classroom full of children that speak Spanish as their first language and you're trying to get their snow pants on and you're not able to speak to them in Spanish, that just doesn't work. And not only is it not practical to think about getting those kids snow pants on, it's also when we think about English language acquisition, there's really strong evidence that it's the combination of leveraging the child's home language that helps them to learn English as a second language. So I would really encourage us to push past the rhetoric that surrounds English only education as a requirement and to think about what the practical realities are. Again, for a classroom of 3-year-olds, you need to be able to communicate with them. So it's a ridiculous requirement, and it's not practical when you think of running a classroom with small children.
Jenny Maurer is the executive director of the Wisconsin Head Start Association. She spoke with WUWM education reporter Catherine Kokel. The public comment period for these proposed changes to Head Start ends on October 6th.
This is Capital Notes from Milwaukee's NPR. I'm education reporter Catherine Kokel, filling in this week for Mayan Silver. Today we're speaking with J.R. Ross, editor of WisPolitics.com, for a special back-to-school edition of the podcast. J.R., ready to talk about school stuff?
Always.
Awesome. So students here in Milwaukee go back to school next week already. Wild. I thought it'd be a great time to chat with you about how education is shaping Wisconsin politics. Let's start, of course, with the governor's race. This fall, Governor and former State Superintendent Tony Evers will be leaving office, and either Republican Tom Tiffany or Democrat David Crowley will be taking his place. I think it's fair to say that education was a huge priority for Evers because of his previous job. What role would you say education has played during Evers' time in office?
The governor has spent a large chunk of his time in office trying to direct more resources to education, all the while fighting Republicans about various aspects of education. A good example of that has been the Act 20, which dedicated more resources to reading. Remember, this was a kind of a bill that passed. The governor used a partial veto to alternate some of the language in there. It took a year-long fight to get everything released. So they got something done. It just took longer to actually get implemented than you thought it would. But for the most part, Evers has played defense on things with education when it comes to Republicans trying to fight for more funding while trying to knock back everything from transgender athletes in schools to various, priorities for Republicans on a parents' bill of rights. I mean, just on the line, these UP priorities for education, the governor is trying to be a backstop against those.
Yeah, I want to go back to that famous or perhaps infamous 400-year veto. For our listeners, that's where Evers used the line item veto to secure increases in the limits that school districts could raise their revenue limits until the year 24-25. There's been a lot of backlash from Republicans on that, like you just mentioned. Could the next governor walk back that line item veto if he wanted to?
No, that law can be changed at any time. So to give context to people about this, in Wisconsin, there's a formula where you take the main pot of state aid and property taxes, and that's what you can spend per student. That annual increase is where the governor reworked the language. Rather it being for 2 years, he made it for 400 years. Now, the challenge is, and why your property tax bill jumped so much in December, is that if you don't put enough state aid into that formula to keep up with the increase, schools can levy more property taxes to make up for it. So we saw increases in both years of this biennium. For 25-27, there was no new state money put into that general big AIDS pot, and that's why property taxes went up, which is why Tom Tiffany is trying to use this as an affordability issue to say, hey, your property taxes are going up because of Tony Evers. I mean, it misses the whole thing about the state aid component, but still, Tony Evers opened the door to this hike, and I will come in the office and fix it. For Democrats, David Crowley, they're talking more about we're not funding schools properly in their minds. They want to do more. So this big question for the next governor is, what resources do you have? And what of those resources will you put into education for K-12 when you've got Medicaid, you've got University of Wisconsin system, you've got all these other kind of demands on the state budget to deal with in your next 2-year period?
Republicans have even gone as far to put a question related to that 400-year veto on the November ballot. It'll ask voters to prohibit the governor from using the partial veto to create or increase any type of tax or fee. If it's passed, how would that impact the 400-year veto regarding school revenue limits? And what are other ways that a line item veto could be used by a governor if that practice is upheld by voters?
So I do not believe that it applies retroactively. Therefore, the 400 veto would remain. And remember, that can be changed anytime. You could have lawmakers come in January of next year and change the law. Signed by the governor, that veto would go away. It's a matter of you have right now a Democratic governor and a Republican legislature, and they can agree on that. So as long as you have no air of agreement, it remains. So this would be a continuation of reigning in that power that's been going on for 20, 30 years. There used to be a thing called the Vanna White veto, where the governor could cross out individual letters, create new words. There was the Frankenstein veto, where the governor could strike out parts of sentences and stitch two of them together to create a new one. The voters reined that in. This would be a new limit on the power. It would still be one of the most powerful veto pens in the country for any governor, because you still can cross out things. You can still write down spending, for example. So if, let's say, the next budget includes $3 million for J.R. Ross, you could cross out some zeros and write that down to $3,000. That still would be there, I believe, even if this were to occur. It still, though, gives a governor great power to rewrite what lawmakers send him or her through the budget process. Remember, it only applies to spending bills. You can't do it anything else. And so yeah, it's still significant power, and you still have the option to override that veto, 2/3 vote in both houses. But we don't have maps right now. They're going to give you 2/3 majorities in two houses. You have to have bipartisan support, override a veto. But that's still going to be a very powerful tool for the next governor to reshape that language that's sent to him or her in the budget.
So with the loss of the Vanna White veto and the Frankenstein veto, I would also argue that we have lost the ability to creatively name vetoes.
Yeah, possibly. They did not come up with a really good name for this one, that's for sure. But, the governor, he struck out a couple of numbers and a dash and just pushed these numbers together. It went from whatever to 2425. He recreated that number out of different numbers. So it's it was a smart move by the governor in terms of how to use that veto. The question is, politically, was it good for him and Democrats to have that? Because now Republicans are hanging over their necks, right, left and right, that your property tax bill went up because of what governors did in this budget, and Democrats didn't stop them.
This is Capital Notes. I'm WUWM education reporter Catherine Kokel. I'm pinch hitting today for Mayan Silver. I'm speaking with J.R. Ross, editor of WisPolitics.com, about the role that education policy is playing in Wisconsin politics. We were just talking about higher ed. You started to talk about it, and so I want to keep talking about what's going on in higher ed here. UW has lost its president and is now working on hiring a new one. The political divide between the Universities of Wisconsin Board of Regents and the system's president was pretty much on full display this spring when UW President Jay Rothman was fired. There's a very public back and forth about how much notice Rothman had about his firing and how the regents felt he really wasn't delivering decisive leadership. How could our governor candidates, David Crowley or Tom Tiffany, affect this new balance as governor? We're coming into a new phase of leadership here.
Well, it depends, what the regents are looking for in a new president and who that person might be speaking to. Rothman, for example, is brought in basically to speak Republican. He's a non-traditional candidate or non-traditional president. Didn't come from an academic background, came from a large law firm. There was a thought that he was brought in because he was more friendly or be a better audience from GOP lawmakers. They control and have controlled both houses of legislature since basically 2011. There was a small window for a couple months, 6 months in 2012, where the Democrats of the Senate via recall elections, but that didn't last. So if you have unified GOP control, how do you make the pitch to Republicans for more resources when Republicans in general think UW gets too much, that the system is out of touch with the average Wisconsinite, and they hear complaints from their constituents that, kid A, B, and C couldn't get into Madison, which is a flagship campus. So Rothman did not do a very good job of that in the minds of some regions because they didn't get more. Yes, they got more in this last budget, current budget, I should say, because Governor Evers made it a bottom line for him with Republicans of, we are going to put roughly $250 million more in UW, but in past budgets, they weren't getting a bunch of new aid from the state. So who is that next governor, and what kind of audience might the new president get with that next governor? If it's Tom Tiffany, I don't have all of his UW bullet points at my beck and call right now, but I will bet you he's not more receptive to these $700 million than what David Crowley might be. And I'll bet you money that neither will be proposing a full request from UW of $700 million. That's just a lot of money that they're asking for. But you're going to get a better audience if you're the UW system from Democrats and Republicans, because Democrats have said for several years now that we have starved the system. In their mind, starved the system. Republicans can have questions about how the system is spending money. They've got questions about DEI. They are not real big fans of the system, especially the Madison campus at times. And that's reflected in their approach to the budget over the last 15 years.
Yeah, the UW Regents also really wanted to see a solid plan from Rothman about how to deal with artificial intelligence. and they said at the time that he didn't really deliver on that. I think AI is something a lot of college students and families are thinking about. I'm talking to them about it a lot in terms of both how it's impacting the entry-level job market and cheating, academic integrity. Is there any interest that you see at the state level in legislating or guiding around AI as it relates to either higher ed or at the K-12 level?
Oh, there have been bills about AI. There's a legislation about cell phone bans in schools, those kinds of things. My impression about the debate with UW and the Capitol has largely been Republicans want it to be more about churning out people ready to start jobs. They have less patience for UW. I don't want to pick on certain majors, so I won't mention them, but some liberal arts degrees are not worth much for Republicans. So for their approach to UW, it's more about whatever you can do to prepare people for the workforce.
Probably a good call not to call out specific degree programs. We'll get a lot of emails. As spoken as someone with a journalism degree.
Yeah.
Okay, turning back to the governor's race a little bit more, I think it's fair to say that neither of our candidates here have made education the cornerstone of their campaigns. But Republican Tom Tiffany supports the voucher program and has repeatedly voted during his time in the legislature to expand it. Conversely, Democrat David Crowley has said that public schools need to be strengthened before the voucher program is expanded. I should say neither man has as strong of opinions as Democratic Socialist candidate Francesca Hong did. She lost in the primary but wanted to end the voucher program. Do you think we'll be hearing more about the voucher program in the months and years to come after this election?
Oh, it'll always be an issue. Yes, if Hong had won, then you're talking about that really being a focal point, especially in Milwaukee. You would have heard a lot of talking points from Republicans about her wanting to end that program. It is popular with a number of parents in Milwaukee. It happens to be a quite Democratic city. If you turn off a number of Democratic voters to a Democratic candidate, it's good for you as a Republican. So that's now kind of been shelved. But you are going to hear in coming years about the program. Democrats have talked about if they have a trifecta, they want more, in their words, accountability. Now, Republicans will argue that there's already accountability. Parents can take their kids out of these schools at any time and go to a different one if they think it's not doing a good job. Democrats, they want more. They want more disclosure about things like how much money is moving from what would have gone to a district to a choice programs or choice schools because of kids who are enrolling in that. There'll be talk about that. So it definitely is going to be an issue going forward for sure. But I don't see it trending toward an end of the program. From my conversations, there's just not that kind of an appetite among a number of Democrats. Now, there definitely are many who want to end it. But with Crowley, for example, I interviewed him a month or so ago, and he said there's not capacity right now in Milwaukee. If you ended choice right now, you couldn't house all these kids in the public school system. They don't have enough teachers right now in Milwaukee to do it. Staff, they just can't. So you're not going to hear David Crowley or see him propose this next budget and end the choice program.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I will end by saying that no politics and education discussion in Wisconsin can be complete without talking about Act 10, which, for listeners, scrapped collective bargaining rights and limited wage increases for public employees like teachers. What changes could we see to Act 10 in this next governorship?
I don't know if the governors will be the ones who change as much as it will be the courts. There was a Dane County judge in late 2024 who found that law inappropriately exempted some public safety employees from its requirements while imposing them on others. The Second District Court of Appeals in Waukesha, which is a conservative appeals court, overturned that ruling, said there was justification for making that difference. Now it's been appealed to the state Supreme Court. The justices haven't said they're going to take the case yet, but there's a going bet that they will. So the court might change it. If it's a full Democratic trifecta in the Capitol, you might see them repeal it. That would possibly happen. But one way or another, we're going to see probably some changes to that law because of the courts and the legal challenges before them. If Tiffany's governor, he's not going to vote to repeal or propose repealing the law. So I wouldn't worry about that happening. But yeah, the courts definitely is an avenue for that law to change right now. That's pretty good. People I talked to in the Capitol are betting that the court would overturn that law if and when it accepts the case.
Well, this was awesome. Thank you so much for diving into all things education with me today, JR.
Hey, anytime.
Just like Capital Notes, Lake Effect is available as a podcast. Find it wherever you get your podcasts. Then subscribe, download, and listen on demand. In about 10 minutes, we'll learn how humanity's ancient relationship with bugs has changed our world. But first, we'll meet artist Warren King, a Wisconsin native who uses an unexpected material to create intricate sculptures. That's coming up on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. You're listening to Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Joy Powers. For most people, cardboard is a throwaway material. But for Wisconsin native Warren King, cardboard is what he uses to tell his family's story. King's cardboard sculptures explore his family's path from China to Wisconsin. And he says if it wasn't for sculpting them, he wouldn't have learned how his ancestors helped shape him. WUWM's Eddie Morales joins King at his Linden Sculpture Garden exhibit to talk art and family.
For artist Warren King, creating sculptures using cardboard is challenging, but that's why he does it. King says cardboard is like wood. It has a grainy texture and distinct visual character. It's rigid, but also flexible.
Once you glue it on, it's very hard to adjust it or change it or move it. So you have to, each piece that you put on, you have to think 3 steps ahead. How is this going to affect the other things down the road? So there's a lot of deliberation before you ever put on a piece.
King began creating cardboard figures around 2014. He didn't have a background in art. He first worked as a structural engineer for his father's engineering firm in Wisconsin after earning degrees from MIT and Stanford University. King says his strict upbringing serves as the foundation for his meticulous process. Here's King talking about his dad.
And it was always his dream from the very beginning to have his children take over the business. So starting from the time when I was, able to hold a pen practically, he was training us to do drafting, to run blueprints, to help around the office.
When King left his father's company, he says his dad felt betrayed.
Our relationship was very rocky for several years. It was very difficult to speak with him, and it was a lot of anger. But as the years unfolded, I eventually got into art. And he didn't really understand the art part of it so much, I would say. But once I started to really dig into the themes, right, family histories and things like that, well, my dad, he turned out to be an amazing keeper of these memories.
Growing up, King didn't know much about his Chinese heritage. He was eager to leave the Midwest and never look back. It wasn't until adulthood and his pursuit of becoming an artist that he felt compelled to understand his ancestry, with the help of his dad.
His memory is wonderful. His attention to detail and his storytelling ability was fantastic. So once I discovered this, then it opened up a whole new way for us to communicate. And when I visited Wisconsin, I would just hang out with him and just ask him questions. Oh, what about this aunt, this uncle? And he would just go and tell me these stories, and I'd be furiously taking notes and thinking about ideas for new sculptures. And I think that he really appreciated.
It was a chance for him to rediscover his roots and learn about his family's journey from China to Wisconsin. 8 of King's cardboard sculptures are included in the exhibition, called Homecoming. It's on display at Linden Sculpture Garden in River Hills. His piece titled The Road Leads Home honors his grandmother, who was raised during the warlord era in China. That was a 12-year period that started in 1916, which saw military factions vying for power after the Chinese president's death. But despite her tough upbringing, her greatest hardship would come years later, when her husband, a combat pilot, was called away to defend China from Japanese attacks. King's grandmother was determined to reunite the family, so she made the 125-mile trek from Guilin to Chongqing with her infant son.
She sold all her belongings, borrowed some money from her parents, her mom, and just gathered what she could. The money that she had, she was worried about being robbed along the way because the roads to the city was full of bandits, right? So she converted her money into a few gold coins and sewed them into her clothes to hide them. And then she strapped her baby to her back and just set off on foot.
The sculpture depicts that scene exactly. 3 gold coins adorn his grandmother's clothes. Her face wears a somber expression. Her heavy eyelids and slight frown reflect her turbulent journey. Remember, all this is portrayed using cardboard.
She survived some of the most difficult bombings in China during that time, civilian bombings. Her memories are of like hiding in sewer tunnels, fleeing, firebombing campaigns. She went through poverty.
Many of King's pieces are covered in copper-colored ink. He explains why.
The thing that really inspired me was Chinese lacquerware, right? Because Chinese lacquerware has such a rich, warm, lively color, but it's also such a labor-intensive process to make lacquerware. And over the ages, it really picks up a patina. So it shows where human hands have touched it and worn it down. And I love that. I love seeing age in something.
Before sculpting human figures, King wanted to make simple toys for his children. So he just used what was around the house. That included cardboard.
But it wasn't until later that I discovered that the meaning of using an ephemeral material really translated well to the themes that I'm pursuing.
I asked King why he believes some families, and immigrant families in particular, sometimes avoid discussions about past traumas.
That's a great point, because I've wondered about that a lot, about my family. And it's, there are some other families, maybe some other cultures even, that are more open to discussing, traumas that happened in the past. But for whatever reason, that wasn't my grandmother's way. Right, and I have always wondered about that. Part of it could be, shame about how things turned out. Part of it could be, and part of it is, she never imagined that we would have interest in it. The few times that I kind of brought this up, she kind of asked, well, why do you want to know about that? As if it had no bearing on my life.
King's work has been showcased in exhibitions around the world, including New York City, where he currently lives, and his former home in Sweden. I ask what he hopes others take away from seeing his artwork.
So whatever revelations that I have gotten from my thinking about this stuff, I'm not even sure how universal it is. But what I would like people to walk away with is just, how did I personally get to that point, right? What steps did I take, or what barriers did I have to knock down to open my mind to receive these things? And I would hope that people can walk away with that and do that for themselves. Because everyone has connections that they may have lost, forgotten about, but they're still there, they're still affecting you. And if people can come to grips with those a little bit more, understand them a little bit more for themselves, that's what I hope people gain from my process.
Warren King's Homecoming exhibition will be on display through November 15th. Eddie Morales, 89.7, WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.
Linden Sculpture Garden is a financial supporter of WUWM. Coming up, we'll look at a book that explores the relationship between humanity and insects. That's next on Lake Effect, on 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. This is Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Joy Powers. You've probably found yourself swatting away flies or mosquitoes this summer. Insects can sometimes seem like a scourge on humanity, but without them, our lives would look very different. The many insects that inhabit our world help feed us, clothe us, and teach us. A book called The Insect Epiphany explores the ancient relationship between humanity and insects. Author Barrett Klein is an animal behavior biologist and entomologist at UW-La Crosse. He joins me to talk about what we can learn from insects. Well, Barrett, thank you so much for joining us here on Lake Effect.
I'm thrilled to be with you.
So your work, much like this book, is about insects. When you talk with people, what are the general perceptions of insects and their contributions to humanity?
Oftentimes, conversations can begin with trepidation, repulsion, fear, or general curiosity. And I think all it takes sometimes is a snippet of wonder and some imagination and some real life examples of how insects have interacted or related with humans throughout history to really inspire and alter people's perspectives about insects. So, for example, I study something a little odd. I study sleep behavior in social insects, and people cock their heads and think about that, and they ask, note that they didn't even know that insects slept, right? And what does that mean to sleep? And similarly, when you bring up examples of clandestine ways in which insects have infiltrated our culture in very positive respects, it can open people's minds and eyes.
This book is really full of interesting ways that insects have kind of infiltrated our lives, and then the ways in which we have drawn from insects to benefit our lives. As you were putting together this book, what were some of the most surprising facts for you as someone who is really deep in this world?
Yeah, there were so many. And that was actually the biggest joy of writing this book was the idea of jumping down rabbit holes and really learning about not only the overt, explicit ways like honeybees and their honey and beeswax and pollination contributions and butterflies and as symbols culturally affecting dances and indigenous peoples' rights, but then the really secret hidden ways that I never expected could exist. So for example, when I was exploring the most ancient ways that peoples had associated with insects, one example that kind of blew me away was the oldest complete and decipherable sentence in any alphabetic script was found on a little comb, a fine-toothed knit or louse comb to remove head lice. And the 17 letters spell out, "May this tusk root out the lice of the hair and the beard." The great part was the archaeologist Garfinkel, Joseph Garfinkel, who was one of the discoverers, responded to one person with, "What were you expecting? A love song? A recipe to make pizza?" But for example, who was the first astronaut in space? It wasn't Yuri Gagarin, and it wasn't a dog, it wasn't a chimpanzee. It was fruit flies in 1946 and then 1947. Who was the first Earthling to give birth to offspring conceived in space? It was a cockroach on Europe's Photon M3. And then where did the ink come from for some of the most famous documents in history, like the Declaration of Independence and the Magna Carta and the US Constitution? Well, it's from oak gall wasps producing oak gall ink, plants protecting themselves as the developing insects would instigate a chemical cascade, and then this physical protection that served, ironically, as shelter and protection for the insect, produced tannins, which then could be used as this long-lasting ink.
Very long lasting. We still have these documents.
That's right. That's right.
The book is really an exploration of all of these things. It's split up into different sections, working with insects, making insects, becoming them. I think people are going to be most familiar with this first section, the idea of working with insects. But this, of course, takes a lot of different forms. What are some of the common ways that we work with insects, products that they might give us or that we use them for?
This was so much fun to explore and pretty easy for me to categorize because first I thought about the products, as you mentioned. What are insects producing and how can we exploit the insects with these products for our gain? And then how do we use body parts or whole bodies, dead, alive, of insects? you've got some ancient and long-lasting uses from silk to beeswax, honey, to true bugs, lacquer, colors, and then paper inspired by insects, chitin, venoms and poisons that have been used to either cure, kill, or transform. I start with silk just because it's probably the most important in some ways. And it's such a strange history because there are very few insects that we've domesticated. And for 5,000 years, we've domesticated this one out of over 180,000 species of moths and butterflies, this one Bombyx mori, and to such an extent that they can no longer fly in nature. So here we've got this silk that we use not only for fabrics and textiles, some little scraps of which exist from thousands of years ago, so it's long lasting, but also it has other utilitarian value. It's very consistent, it's super strong and somewhat flexible, and of course it has that luster. So people have used it in ways that involve optics, little guides, whether it be observational equipment for astronomy or for the military. If we depart from silkworm moths to black widow spider silk or other spider silk, there were farms in the US during World War I and II to produce the silk to use in those ways. And even World War I explosives from the US, 100% of them were delivered in silk pouches because silk has this weird property where if it burns or explodes, it doesn't leave ash or any residue behind. If I were to guess, I'd say that of all the insect products, silk is probably number one in terms of being represented in museums and galleries in people's homes, either as canvases or as piecemeal parts holding things together. And that's just a fiber that's used to produce a cocoon so an insect can pupate or go through full metamorphosis to winged adulthood. Then you look at products like honeybees wax and honey and propolis and our history of robbing colonies to keeping colonies and even looking to them in terms of their decision making and their efficient division of labor. And then you've got the true bugs in the order Hemiptera. So all bugs are insects, but not all insects are bugs. So the bugs belonging to this one order have piercing, sucking mouth parts as immatures and adults. And some of them don't look insect-like at all, even as adults. And these are the scale bugs. And one species of scale bug produces the only animal resin that humans have exploited, and that's lac turned shellac. And you'll see those coat sculptures, coat wood floors, coat furniture. Lac was used to make 78 RPM records, dyes, red dyes in textiles. So the list goes on and on and on. We used to spray our hair and use it in cosmetics and paint our nails, as well as dye our clothes. So the lac bug has been super important, as has the cochineal bug that are raised in Sonora, Mexico, and Oaxaca, for example. And these true bugs that produce this, what Amy Butler Greenfield in a beautiful book called The Perfect Red, a brilliant scarlet, and depending on what mordant you use with a fabric, can range from this brilliant red all the way to a purple. And it was so valued that when the Spanish conquistadors exported it by the tons, second only to silver exports from the Aztec and Maya people to the Old World went crazy over this red.
Now, one of the things your book explores is this idea of kind of making insects, or at least remaking them in a way that suits our purposes. How have insects inspired engineers of all types?
Oh, in so many ways. So when I talk about fabricating insects, that can take many, many forms, either by engineers, by architects, by artists, and others. So if we think about engineers using biomimicry or mimicking nature, there are solutions that have played out over hundreds of millions of years by insects And those same solutions from head to tarsus could be applied to engineering problems that humans face. And so there are countless examples. I just skim a little surface of examples that I was really excited about in the book to explore these mimicries, these engineering marvels from insect origins. Some can be from the compound eyes of insects. Some can be from the wings of insects. Some can be looking at how insects move across uneven terrain in order to build robots. Some will match the decentralized control across a number of robots that try to mimic ants or other colonial insects, for example. Some of my favorite examples involve artists trying to exquisitely replicate insects either in part or in toto. So for example, there's an artist, Haruo Mitsuha, in Japan who applies a really old cultural practice, jizai okimono, which is to take either fantastical creatures or real organisms like insects and replicate them in metal, but not only in metal, articulated so that you can pull open the sheath-like forewings of a beetle and unfold or unravel the wings, the hind wings of the beetle, and move each leg segment and move the mandibles. So jizai okimono is one way, but also largely from Japan, origami. And there are some spectacular examples. There was a battle of the bugs in the 1980s and 90s to try to do more and more complicated foldings to replicate insects in their intricate ways.
The final thing that you explore in this book kind of gets to this idea of really analyzing insects, exploring their bodies, and learning, in some ways, things about the human condition through insects, whether that's being inspired in how we dress, how we dance, and also how we fight. How has the insect world influenced how humans behave?
Really great question. And it's a lot of ways. I mentioned this idea of decentralized control, and it's the idea that you don't have one overbearing ruler that makes all the decisions, but rather you spread out the decision making across a collective and see what emerges most democratically. And I think one of the most effective examinations was by Tom Seeley in The Honeybee Democracy, where in the last chapter he looks at human decision making. And he was struck with being a chairperson for his neurobiology behavior department. And he decided to look to his honeybees. How do they make decisions? Could I apply that to human decision making? And he analyzed the 5 different steps or criteria that allow people to do so effectively, at least under some circumstances. So we could even think not just in terms of democratic voting and making decisions where numbers drive the behaviors, but we could also look at how traffic flows and municipal decision making has looked to ants and other insects. How do they cart around these heavy things like leafcutter ants carrying around their parasol, their little cut leaf fragments from the high canopy of a tree to their subterranean fungal cultivars as agriculturists, as farmers for 55 million years. And we can look at the flow where it looks maybe a little sloppy at first, but then you see, wow, this is efficient in a way that maybe traffic jams could be alleviated or carting material goods could be augmented. So there are a lot of ways decision-making and municipal practices could benefit by examining the collective decision-making and the collective practices of insects.
When you think about this book as a whole, what do you hope people take away from it?
My biggest hope, my not-so-hidden agenda, is that people not only tolerate the quintillions of insects around us, this most diverse of arthropods, 60% of all animal species, at least described, probably way more undescribed, are represented by these hexapod neighbors of ours, but that we begin to deeply appreciate them, taking the time out to observe so that we can celebrate these marvels all around us that are sadly diminishing at our hands. Instead, if we look at their myriad ways of affecting not only ecosystem services on which we depend, but the cultural services that have changed and shaped us as a species, I think we'd be in a better world.
Yeah. Well, Barrett, thank you so much for joining us here on Lake Effect and sharing your work.
My pleasure. I always love talking about insects. Thank you so much.
Barrett Klein is an animal behavior biologist and entomologist at UW-La Crosse. His book is called The Insect Epiphany: How Our Six-Legged Allies Shape Human Culture. I spoke with Klein in 2024. And that wraps up today's show. I'm Joy Powers. If you ever miss Lake Effect, you can find all of our conversations at wuwm.com. If you'd like to take the show on the go, you can download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Tomorrow on Lake Effect, it's been 10 years since the fatal police shooting of Seville Smith sparked unrest in Sherman Park. We'll explore how the community has changed in that time. Thanks so much for joining us right here on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.